All right. So yesterday we made some predictions based on what the polls said versus what the social media analytics said with deep listening. My name is Seth Towerherd. I run a company called Manx Solutions, and it's really fun for me to look at this because these numbers apply just as well to business and nonprofit organizations as they do into the political world. And it's very rare that we get to measure something so quickly like a political election does give us, because it gives us, the work that was going up to it, what we can see in the numbers, and then how things actually turned out. We weren't 100% right, which we're going to break down. This is James O'Brien joining me from Grey Rock Digital. Let's go ahead and get right into it. We reviewed 3 races based on the numbers yesterday. Let's start with the ones we got wrong, so we can end on a high note, if that's cool with you. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start with the Missouri governor's race. You called it. You've got much deeper insights into this than I do. You called it for Bill Eigel. He didn't quite get there. Mike Kehoe in Missouri wound up winning that race. Tell me about that.
Yeah, Mike Kehoe ended up being the primary establishment Republican candidate. He's the sitting lieutenant governor, had the support of course, Governor Parsons, right? And Bill Eigel's campaign, and he's already had a great response this morning, which is, there is a clear message that the Republican Party is fundamentally changing. And if it's fundamentally changing in places like Missouri, it's fundamentally changing across the country. And we definitely have Donald Trump leading that and leveraging that. And so Eigel has been winning in social media. He's been winning in the grassroots, and that'll continue to happen. So where Kehoe won this was absolutely being able to just raise millions of dollars and be on TV and radio and in physical mailboxes, snail mail, everywhere and continually. And I think as an alternative to Kehoe, there's also Ashcroft in this race, Jay Ashcroft, who's a great Secretary of State. He was the front runner coming into this. And he was in third place in terms of social media and analytics. So that was a challenge for their campaign. And I think they had a lot of the wind taken out of their sails from the traditional stuff Kehoe was doing. And then, Eigel down in the grassroots of the party with a lot of the conservatives and Trump support, and trying to break those people off was tough because they started to coalesce and say, hey, we're going to support Eigel and we're going to support Dave Wassinger, who Dave Wassinger actually won the lieutenant governor's race in a pretty close bout there. He's also somebody, who can spend a lot of his own money, is a good fundraiser. So we do see that it's impossible to get around traditional media. You can't say we're just going to be, a social candidate. I'm going to win this campaign on Facebook. But that can help you lead. And I think it's a requirement of winning that you have people able to respond to the grassroots and that your campaign is able to manage effectively that aspect of your campaign, where if you don't have the money to constantly be publishing in traditional media in terms of advertising, then you very much need to be constantly publishing on social, right? So you're going to be doing this, this process, if you're going to be successful, no matter what campaign strategy you choose to follow.
Well, and let me kind of make this more universal as well for Kehoe. Here in St. Louis, he bought all the billboards. And what I normally tell people when I've got clients or friends that ask me to do billboards work, my answer is always, if you can get a gang of them, get a whole bunch of billboards. If you can afford 2 billboards, do not. If you can afford 20 billboards, absolutely go for it. There's just something about being basically overwhelming somebody with a message that they're going to see over and over again. We go back to kind of that classic stat in the business world that somebody needs to see you 8 times before they even recognize your name or your product. And if you're going to buy 2, that's just money that has been flushed away. You should spend it on digital advertising or possibly direct mail or something, because billboards are still pretty dang expensive, and you can make the case that everybody's looking at their phone while driving, which is terrifying. But They still work. They absolutely still work. You just got to figure out what your budget is and whether or not you can really go all in there. I would also say if it's all you can afford to do, like if billboards are all going to take up all your money, they're probably still not worth it. You need to be able to do billboards and a whole bunch of other stuff. Mike Kehoe did billboards and a whole bunch of other stuff, and it seemed to have paid off for him pretty well.
Yeah, and we had a famous lieutenant governor whose strategy was always around putting up the 4x4 and the 4x8 yard signs across rural Missouri, and that worked extremely well for him. He led that led his campaign spending, and I completely agree with you. That I had one of my favorite all-time candidates, Jacob Turk, who ran against Emmanuel Cleaver a number of times over in District 5, Missouri, found a great deal from an urban sign company. And when he paid for just a handful of signs, they put a number of other signs up. And then really after the campaign, they never took the signs down. And some of them were up for years. And they actually tried to file campaign grievances, FEC report grievances against the campaign, like they were getting value and the company was making contributions that they weren't. It was like, you go take down the signs. Like, we're not going to. So what that does is, it's a show of force, but it also meets expectations that people have for campaigns. And so, I'll get asked about yard signs and how important they are. And they really are, because if you don't have a yard sign, a lot of people will ask that question, and they might be the people who pay the most attention, who are like the repeat primary voters, your super voters. Be like, well, how are you going to win without yard signs, right? So if you even just have a couple and they see that you have them, you've checked their box for that. And then you still obviously need to have issue positions and show up and all that. But you've met one of those expectations, one of those 8 impressions that, if you will, that you need to make. So, I totally agree with your advice on that.
What can you sort out from media coverage of Mike Kehoe, the winner? Republican primary, presumed person who's going to win the governorship in a red state. Were the local and state press more kind to him? Did he have an easier time than the other 2 candidates, or what's your read there?
I think one of the things he was able to do was to have an apparatus that could dominate that process. And I think Jay Ashcroft's campaign was similarly effective. And Eigel's campaign, I think, took a different strategy. Because even, Eigel, at the beginning of his race, was threatened with cease and desist letters from the Trump campaign, because he was basically making it sound like he was the Trump-endorsed guy before Trump endorsed anybody. And Trump ended up endorsing all 3 of those candidates, which some people could call him out for that, and some people could say it's another genius decision, because this was a close race. This was hard to discern who was going to win this 3-way battle. And there were 3 really great men. That's the good news for the Republican Party, is all 3 of these guys would make a great governor. Kehoe is going to be a lot more, moderate Republican. But, conservative Democrats have a huge voice in Missouri. I mean, this was, people can remember this being almost a blue state, definitely a purple state. They say it's red now, but there's a tremendous amount of Democrats. And we see that in the other race that we called, which was Wesley Bell defeating Cori Bush. And we saw Bell winning that, but my big takeaway from last week and even last month was seeing Cori Bush lose it, where her digital footprint was shrinking in terms of unique authors, in terms of impressions, across the board. And so we talked about that yesterday as, people literally leaving her campaign or support and moving to Wesley Bell's, because he's more the conservative. Well, he is the conservative Democrats candidate in that race, and they turned up in that primary huge for Bell, and the left, couldn't do the organizing that they normally do on her behalf. And I think a lot of that was overwhelmed with social and traditional media. I mean, you mentioned the number of direct mail pieces you got from Bell, which, I mean, it's just
I will say that that campaign, was able to do direct mail work that I only dreamed of, even working for major corporations. I would have never dreamed to go ask for enough money to send like an 8.5 by 11 direct piece of mail, basically like a magazine cover, like every day in a row for 10 days. Because I
Right.
probably would have gotten physically slapped in corporate America for asking for that much money. Uh, and they had raised a ton of money and were going to spend it, which that seems to have hit. When you looked at the numbers, you showed some pretty big spikes when we were studying this data, and the spikes seem to come more from positive reactions to Wesley Bell being up way more in the polls than he wound up being. Does it seem like the polls actually give a bigger bump than traditional media coverage, like than a positive? Because I wasn't able to correlate one piece of like positive, media on Bell having a big bump versus a poll being, kind of going crazy.
Yeah, that's actually a great question to even analyze more after this. So uh, I have the advantage of being in the platform here and actually just hovering over those spikes and actually seeing all the messaging that's associated with them. And then I can further break down that messaging that I'm seeing in those spikes by sentiment. So people that are happy, people that are sad, people that are surprised, disgusted, fearful. Fearful has been a big one. Today, it's sadness, and my message to Bell's campaign, which is, Cory Bell supporters or I'm sorry, Cory Bush's supporters are sad, but I think you might be happy from the victory. There's a lot of sad conservatives that Bill Eigel lost in Missouri, right? And then I think people all woke up this morning with no feeling that like our country is any stronger than it was the day before. We still have all these problems that we're dealing with on a national basis, and we still have the general election to get through. People, I think, are really starting to just feel that overwhelm, feel all that emotion that comes. Like you have little kids
Yeah.
too, and like when they just get to a certain point, they almost don't know what to do but cry. Even if they're happy, they're just overwhelmed. I think a lot of people are in or close to that state. And so my message to his campaign and to many campaigns is like, you really have to think emotionally of where your supporters are at if you want to be able to connect with them today. And so my goal of being a good leader was like, hey, listen, you know what? This was important. What we did was critical. We saw that in our campaign for Pfeiffer against Wagner. The numbers that he was able to pull against Ann Wagner, spending less than $5,000, were absolutely stunning to me. I was blown away. If he had spent $1 million and gotten that amount, it would have been less impressive. But I mean, that was literally just digital and grassroots.
Yeah.
And so so you can learn so much from that, right? But again, talking to Pfeiffer supporters, it's the same thing. It's like, hey, you sent this message that this is the Republican Party changing.
Well, and
we're leading this national battle. So we need to continue to lead. Like, we haven't lost anything. We've proved the strength of the movement changing the Republican.
Let me zoom out a little bit too on when you're measuring sadness and that type of thing around this election, because one of the connection points that I just made, we'd have to dig into the data to prove this, but I'm going to throw out a theory. One of the connection points I've made that is probably universal for businesses is that when you're seeing a lot of sadness, anxiety, et cetera, around presidential election, possible larger global conflict, et cetera, you start to see the pop culture spending tick up. And so I'm thinking back to the 2012 election, which was not nearly as contentious as it is now, but that would have been Obama-Romney. Yeah, Obama-Romney. And I remember at the time, there were some big video game releases, including one of the Halo games, GTA 5, right around that time, spiked like crazy. And you notice that in July, after having a pretty bad summer, movies have spiked up. So Twisters did really well. Deadpool and Wolverine, or Deadpool, whatever that movie was called, did very well. And it seems like not only were those kind of the right project that people wanted to go to the local theater for, but it seemed like the worse the news gets, the more people will run to video games, movies, and I would say possibly theme parks, because those tend to do pretty well in recessions. And I wonder how many people did like a kind of unconsciously did an emergency trip to, Six Flags or Disney World or whatever it is, to get out of the reality for the day. And so measuring sadness actually across the board in a whole bunch of different industries, sadness, angst, etc., can tell you what people are going to be doing. Now, don't be evil with that and weird, but realize what's possible.
Yeah, no, and so and I was thinking, comfort food. Right?
Oh,
I got Domino's pizza yesterday at the poll that I was judging, and that pizza tasted so good. And I'm originally from New Jersey. I crave, New Jersey, New York pizza. It's hard to find great pizza here in St. Louis. You got the thin crust stuff going on. That's cool. I dig it culturally. But boy, I miss me some Jersey. And so, but yesterday there was something about the comforting nature of all those carbs and bread and melted cheese, even though it was Domino's pizza. So, like, it satiated my emotional needs, right? And so, I think a lot of people.
So
are
if you're
and a lot of people are not.
If you're day trading on, stocks, like gym memberships, etc., would be a good thing to buy probably in late November, as everybody started hitting the reality of December and January that they way overate out of stress.
Yeah, no, there's some funny pictures of me on the Trump campaign in 2016 where people are like, James, we've never seen you be fat before. And I was like, thank you. I had several jackets, okay? But yeah, I mean, you're sitting on the phone and you're eating and sadly enough, and drinking quite a bit too. I mean, that's part of the campaign culture. And boy, I got to tell you that, but you need it at the end of the night, because you're putting in 12, 14, 16-hour days sometimes. And and it takes its toll on your body. But yeah, and I think that's true across every market. And so I think every brand does need to be a lot more politically tuned in, and not necessarily political themselves, because people aren't getting that break. Like, I don't want to be hit with that BS when I walk into Target and I'm still having the debate in my head over gender identity. It's like, shut up! I'm here to buy whatever I'm here to buy.
Yeah,
no,
that's a pretty good way to say it, as opposed to companies who are always trying to come up with the next gimmick. Maybe just stay away from the next gimmick and just go with what the heck is happening with people and in their lives outside of buying your product, and just speak to that, and you can have overwhelming success there. We've got a meeting here in just a minute, so you want to call it there? I think we were able to dig out some good stuff. If you are watching this and you need some help from James and myself, you'll be able to click on something around one of these videos and get in touch with us. Do not be led astray that just because there is a bunch of activity on social media, or not a bunch of activity on social media, that instantly means you are winning or losing. It could be that people are, if you're not listening deep enough, it could be people are sort of passively aggressively mad at you. And if you're quiet right now, it also could be that there are key fans, key supporters out there in whatever it is you make or put out into the world or sell. It could be that those people are able to be reached out to during a quiet time, and you can really build some personal connections with some of your core customers during that time. So just going off of a top-level analytics report, like a lot of executives tend to do, on like, just give me more numbers. Give me more numbers may make your product or service fail faster. You got to see what's really going on.
Well said.